Great to be here at Fort Collins. We'll also take some questions from the floor. We'll get to as many as we can with the comment cards, and then we'll hear from individuals. I think we have some mics that you can come down to. It's great to be here. We had a good town hall in Wellington that I just came from. Great participation there as well. I want to, mostly it's your meeting, and I want to hear from you, but I'll start by giving a little update from Washington, what's going on, and kind of what to watch for in the next few weeks and months. So far, it's been, this a lot of the legislative action in this Congress will likely occur in September and October of this year, because several of the must-pass bills come up. There's a government shutdown if we don't fund government for the following year, September 30th deadline. We also have to increase the debt ceiling. That's for money that the government's already spent. It's the borrowing authority, also by September 30th. We also have some other things that are important to Northern Coloradans, like the National Flood Insurance Bill and the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization also expired September 30th. So most likely, all of those will be lumped together in one big bill, which may or may not meet the September 30th deadline. What Congress has done in the past, they're notorious for missing deadlines, is they'll do a 1 or 2 week extension, so they might say it'll actually be October. But sometime around the end of September or early October, a lot is coming to a head. This is also the bill that most recently President Trump said he wants to fund his border wall in, or else he might veto it, so there could actually be, again, a shutdown of government over that. There's the status of the deferred action kits that have come here that could be part of this too. President Trump has not said whether he'll defend a lawsuit against that or agree to have it in statute as part of this bill. The young people will continue to have the provisional work permits that they have to be able to work here. So watch all of that in September and October. I'll do my best to represent our district. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. Certainly we're worried about some of the proposed budget cuts to in science and areas that are important to our economy locally too, whether it's CDC or science investment at CSU or the federal labs. Those are all very important for Colorado, and so we'll certainly be watching those as well. I've been able to get 3 bills through in this Congress. 2 of them are public land bills. One of them expanded the boundaries of Rocky Mountain National Park to include some inholdings. Another one was for Bolt's Ditch, access to water in Minturn and Eagle County. But the district I represent is 65% public land. It's not only a big part of our quality of life and our lifestyle and our heritage, it's also a big driver of jobs in the area, like Estes Park, Rocky Mountain National Park, over 3 million visitors a year. Many of them also spend money in Fort Collins. So when we talk about our public lands, we here in Colorado in the West really know that that's an important part of how many people earn their living. So of all the different high-stakes battles around environmental issues, and of course we're worried about some of the cuts to the EPA, eliminating some of the emissions rules. The most dangerous would be if they succeed in privatizing public lands, because that's permanent. There's no going back once those lands are gone. You can always change an emissions rule, and you can always have future governments that do things to clean up our air and water. But once public lands are gone, they're gone once, they're gone forever. They're developed, they're gone. You no longer have them available for, again, hunting, fishing, hiking, or the jobs that they create in our communities, like, of course, Estes Park, Fort Collins, Vail, Copper Mountain, all of our wonderful resorts. Many of those ski resorts are leaseholds on public lands. They actually operate on public lands, White River National Forest, under a 30-year lease. So that's very important. So we have 2 public land bills. The third bill I passed is the Email Privacy Act that would require that the federal government get a warrant to access your emails that are older than 6 months. There's currently a bit of a loophole where, because the privacy laws were written before email, a warrant is needed to get your voicemails or your personal correspondence, but email, there's not even a warrant needed if it's more than 6 months old. So I have a bipartisan bill that passed that does that, and hope to get that across the finish line and close on that loophole. 2 instances just in the last few weeks where Congress has, in a bipartisan way, stood up to President Trump, which some of you will also find encouraging. One, Congress passed almost universally in the House, like 420 to 3 or something like that, a bill to remove the authority of the president to unilaterally remove the Russian sanctions. That's because Democrats and Republicans agreed, and when Congress wants to, they can establish primacy when they agree on something. And so we agree, there's just too much smoke, too much uncertainty. Republicans join Democrats in saying, you have to come back to Congress if you want to remove the Russian sanctions. The other thing that happened over summer, really unprecedented, is the Senate stayed in pro forma session, meaning they denied President Trump the ability to make recess appointments, to fill deputy secretary positions, assistant secretary positions. That's something the Republican Senate did to President Obama, but they were of different parties. As far as I know, it's never been done by a Senate controlled by the same party as the president. But the Democratic and Republican senators basically said, we don't trust this president to make these appointments. We want our say. We want to vote them yea or nay, up or down. And so they retained that prerogative by basically just having two senators going to work every day and gaveling in and gaveling out. And it's a way that they're technically in session even while they're not really in session. So those are two ways, just in the last few weeks, that Republicans and Democrats have banded together to at least rein in some of the excesses from this presidency. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about the distractions, the circus-like atmosphere of the presidency, but of course, more perniciously and more worrisome, some of the inappropriate rhetoric in terms of instead of uniting a divided nation after Charlottesville, in fact, stoking the fires more by insinuating moral equivalency between neo-Nazis and anti-neo-Nazis. To their credit, many Republicans joined in with many Democrats in saying that the statements of President Trump were inappropriate. Of course, he had one set of appropriate statements that was sandwiched between two inappropriate statements the day before and the day after. But he continues to really rub salt on that wound, and we need more than ever a president that brings us together, for all Americans. And while we certainly hope that he rises to that occasion, he hasn't demonstrated that, certainly in the rhetoric most recently surrounding Charlottesville. So with that, we'd love to open it up. This is for you. I'm here to listen. I'm here to respond. Any questions you have or suggestions for ideas for new policies. I also want to mention that our office is available to you as your federal ombudsman on any issue related to the federal government. So if you have trouble with your veterans benefits, with Social Security, with immigration, anything that's federal, call our office. We're right here in Fort Collins. We are happy to open up casework for you. We've generally been very successful in getting your response accelerated. We can get you a quicker response. Obviously, whether you succeed or not depends on the merits of your claim. But instead of being buried in some pile of paperwork somewhere, usually a call from the congressman can help them deal with that promptly. So we're happy to help. We've helped thousands of Larimer County residents on different kinds of issues, and just know that our office is here for you. So with that, I'll turn it back to Mara, and we'll start with some of your comments and questions. It's on Facebook, so just so people can see it from their homes, a few people who wanted to see it couldn't make it here, so it's available for them too. But if you're shy, and you don't want to put your question now, we'll probably shut that off in about half an hour. But so everybody now, you might be on Facebook if you ask a question.
Very exciting. You might have
for everything is going to expire September 30th. But you're right, highlighting a particular program that people rely on. And when people say, "Oh, funding will expire and nobody will notice," that's simply not true. There's so many functions every day that affect our lives, and you talked about a real life, life and death situation in terms of the impact on young mothers. I'm certainly supportive of the program. I've supported different letters that have supported that program. Hopefully that will be in a final funding bill. But again, if Congress doesn't agree, that's an example of a program that would lose all of its funding. As with many others, Rocky Mountain National Park would close as it did last time there was a government shutdown right here while we're still in tourist season. So there's a lot of things like that happen. But thank you for highlighting an important one. Well, I'm looking at a particular issue, but I would say that Congress often talks about playing around with different indexation of benefits. They do it talking about Social Security benefits. That's when anybody who's a Social Security recipient notices, because it was actually zero for a couple of years, and then there was a small one. They do it on, as you indicated, veterans health care benefits. So I don't know the exact status of that battle. I'll have to check, and I'll have my staff get your information, and we'll follow up on where that is in the Senate or the House. But what you do is you can make, when some people think that they can sort of save money by making small adjustments on how things are indexed, but then what happens is they become detached from reality, because people have real costs. I mean, the most appropriate index is the one that reflects the cost that people have in that area. So whether it's healthcare, whether it's groceries and rent. And so in many ways, we actually do have, I mean, for instance, when Social Security didn't increase for 2 or 3 years in a row, it didn't make much sense to recipients here, because they said, what do you mean? My rent's been going up and my costs have been going up. Like, what index is this? And it's because it's such a broad basket index, it should be a more focused index, and there is a proposal for one that's for Social Security that's focused on what seniors actually do with their money and live off, as opposed to sort of this broad-based one. So for every index, my approach would be, let's index it to the actual costs, and so it actually is tied into healthcare or tied into what seniors buy or whatever it is. We will respond to you on that particular one and the status of it, but it doesn't surprise me because there's always these behind-the-scenes efforts to mess around with these things. So I hope so. Drug costs are a very big contributor to healthcare costs, and Americans get a raw deal. We get a raw deal. We're paying 5-8 times as much as Canada, as Europe. No, it's one thing if pharmaceutical companies are selling into countries that aren't wealthy at lower rates. If Tanzania or Kenya, it's completely appropriate. But there's no reason that somebody in France or Germany or England or Canada should be paying 1/5 as much for the same prescription drug. It's simply unfair to Americans. The full burden of the profits of the industry and the research is on our shoulders. Now, so here's the good news and the bad news. The good news is the answers are actually fairly simple. There's 2 specific ones that I support. One is allowing reimportation of prescription drugs from Canada. The second one is allowing Medicare to negotiate for prescription drug rates. Those 2 things would have an enormous impact on bringing our drug costs along with other countries. The bad news is that while they're simple, we haven't been able to get them passed, and a majority of Congress does not support those. I did offer the drug reimportation amendment during the healthcare bill repeal process. Like every amendment, it was shot down on a partisan vote. Now, it wasn't because of the content of that amendment, because they actually didn't allow any amendments from Democrats or Republicans as part of that bill to replace the Affordable Care Act with something that was far worse. But I did offer it, we got to discuss it, it was a partisan vote. And I think, we're going to continue to try to pursue that, because when we look, whatever we do on the insurance side, I mean, whatever you do, Affordable Care Act or something different, or even Medicare for All, whatever you do, you can't get around the cost factor unless you do something on prescription drugs, you do something on pricing transparency, and a number of other areas. So I hope that whatever we do on insurance, we can cover more people with less money if we have a way to reduce costs in there too. So I will certainly take that back as a priority, and hopefully that's something that Congress can act on, because the solutions aren't that complicated. We do have a group, it's called No Labels Problem Solvers Caucus. It's 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans. I'm in it, and I think the only Republican from Colorado is Mike Kaufman, who's a representative from Aurora. He's in it. And yes, we've been meeting for several weeks, and we've actually agreed on, 75% of our group agreed on a set of principles to improve the Affordable Care Act and make it work better. So we are going to get back and even work on more. It didn't contain, and I wish it did because I pushed it, but we haven't yet got the consensus on the cost cutting of PTS, which are really important. But at least in some of the insurance reform ideas, we have some common ground that would make the Affordable Care Act better. It has to ultimately be picked up by Republican leadership. They control the House. Rank and file members can pressure leadership, but it takes Speaker Ryan, Mitch McConnell to schedule a vote to move it forward. But it starts with members of Congress, and the fact that we have 20 Democrats and 20 Republicans working together, we can build out from there. Won't be the plan I want. I'm sure it's not the plan they want, but it's everybody can agree that these are improvements to the current Affordable Care Act that will help bring down costs. Well, I mean, Democrats have lots of ideas. I think the frustration with forget about the policy, the frustration with the process the Republicans used, they shut down every single amendment. And also they kept baiting and switching their own bill. They would pull it out, and then out of a closed room there'd be a different bill like 4 days later, and they say this is it. And the final Senate bill that they voted on, senators didn't see for more than an hour or 2 before they voted on it. No less, of course, had no chance to further amend that bill as well. And by the way, it wasn't so much, and of course we appreciate their votes, Senator McCain and Murkowski and Collins, that halted that process to replace the Affordable Care Act with something worse. Frankly, it was you. It was the American people rising up. It was the unprecedented volume of calls, of marches, of emails, the town halls. That is what stopped and what saved the healthcare. So thank you for doing that. That's truly what did it. These senators didn't make some decision on their own in isolation. That's what did it. The volume of mail to my office alone increased 5 times. And it was over 2,000 contacts to preserve aspects of the Affordable Care Act, and under 100 that supported this repeal. I mean, just overwhelming in a district that is fairly balanced and has more unaffiliated voters than Democrats and Republicans. But it was simply because, again, the Republicans did a very poor job of coming up with a replacement. I mean, and they didn't even, and they kept moving it around and switching it. So now that that's failed, the bipartisan work can occur. So there's going to be hearings in the Senate. We have this No Labels Problem Solvers group here. I'm sure there's other discussions going on between members of both parties that I'm not in the room for. But I think everybody agrees that we can make it better. And I think Democrats are happy to talk about ideas. As I said, we introduced a number of amendments. I did 3, but they were all just shut down on a party vote. And obviously that was a side action, and that's why they didn't cover it very much, because it was really the will it pass or not. That was the big thing they covered. They weren't as interested in, you know, the Democratic amendments that were defeated. Who's others? Oh gosh, I'd have to look at the count. It's hard, on the Democratic side, our caucus has a lot of women. The issue is always on the Republican side, where they don't have a lot of women. So something like a third, sure, I know the Democratic caucus, a majority of the caucus is either minority or women. On the Republican side, there's not a lot of women. I know, I can think of one Republican woman who leads in that effort. Elise Stefanik is always there. Also the one from Arizona, trying to remember her name, she's always there. Martha McSally. So I can think of 2 Republican women on there that are part of that group. I mean, the Democrats, as I said, they're going to be like almost half women anyway, but I can think of 2 Republican women that are part of that. That's it. It's a great idea. I hope that you pursue an initiative there to do that, because we have a lot more recycling initiatives in cities like Fort Collins and Boulder, and in part it's because there's just more people and there's just more economies around it. It's harder to do in Grant County, but I think there's a big void there. So I've been very supportive of efforts for federal health in these areas, and I think it would be a great idea for you to kind of explore. And I'd be happy to, we can give my office your contact information. We'd certainly be happy to help in any way, because we would love to see the same kind of opportunities around recycling in Grant County that we have in Fort Collins and Boulder. So it's a great idea, and I'm glad you're pursuing it, because there's a huge potential to keep our areas, beautiful areas, cleaner because of that. First of all, generally speaking, he can shrink national monuments that are not laid out in statute. That's why it's better to do wilderness in law. I've been working to establish over 50,000 acres of additional wilderness in Eagle and Summit County. When that succeeds, and also relevant to our existing wilderness areas, the president can't shrink those. That's not in the authority of any president. However, the national monuments that have been done through executive order, whether it was by President Obama or Bush or Clinton, doesn't matter, whenever they were done, or Reagan, they can be changed by a future executive order. Now, again, I'm not an attorney, and I understand there could be lawsuits that argue that he can't do that, but it also seems likely that he can do that. And so we're very concerned with this. If he proceeds with these plans to shrink our national monuments, our legislative approach would be then to propose bills that reestablish them with their old boundaries. We will have to, of course, pass those bills, and indeed, if the president opposes them, pass them with 2/3. So I'm not saying it's likely they pass given the composition of the current Congress, but law always wins out over executive authority if Congress can agree on something. So when we do something in law, it cannot just at the whim of a president be reversed. That's why it's better to have more permanent wilderness and other definitions, classifications of public land in law. But I think she asked about his desire to shrink monuments. I think it's a bad idea. I've either have or will. I saw it in draft form. I'm not sure whether it's gone out yet. Signing letters to Secretary Zinke opposing this. And so hopefully we can support that. I don't believe that they can sell off any public lands without an act of Congress. The danger is there could be an act of Congress that authorizes that or allows that. The president can change the definition and uses of public lands subject to the laws that are passed. So when he's talking about shrinking public monuments, he's not privatizing the land. He's no longer affording it monument status, which means it's public land, but it could be leased for oil, it could be developed, it could be grazing, it could be any of the different uses that we currently do on our public lands, but are not appropriate for our national monuments, which are protected for a reason. You know, again, the statutory aspect of what we do in law is always going to win out over what the president does. He cannot, without authority from Congress, sell our public lands, but we're very concerned that there are certainly those in Congress that are seeking to give that authority. And that, again, is of all the environmental issues that many of us are concerned about, and I certainly am, that is the most important because it's the most permanent, because there's no going back when lands are, and in the district I represent, it's 65% public land, and that's an important part of our Colorado heritage, our quality of life, of course the environmental benefits of preserving that land, and also the tourism and recreation economy and the jobs. So for all those reasons, I couldn't quite hear the second part of the question, but I do want to make clear that this, I mentioned something about governor, this is a meeting for me being in my position as a representative, so I can't answer in this venue anything related to campaigns in the future. But yes, this will be my last term in Congress. I've said I'm not running for Congress again, but I'll certainly be representing you for the next year and a half, so I'm happy to hear from you. So, currently, young people that, you know, fit this category, brought here when they were 2 or 5 or 6, through no fault of their own, grew up here as American as you or I, knew your kids in the schools, etc. Many of them have provisional work permits under something called deferred action, executive order, DACA, deferred action, same thing. And that was put in place by President Obama. That's in jeopardy now. President Trump has not been clear about what he plans to do with that program. Because it's an executive action and not a law, he has the ability to undo it with the stroke of a pen. We'll see whether he does. If he undoes it, it would leave almost 20,000 Coloradans in the lurch, people who today are able to work legally, who if it were rescinded, would not be able to work legally the next day. I often say that's very ironic, given the campaign promise of President Trump to reduce illegal immigration. If he were to eliminate deferred action, it would create hundreds of thousands of more people who are here illegally, because they would go from being here legally and working legally to the very next day being illegal. So it would actually increase the number of people who are unable to work legally in our country. It's the opposite of what he campaigned on. I don't know what he's going to do. If he does try to remove deferred action, again, it would come back to Congress for Democrats to say, we demand to keep government open, that we put, you know, a status for deferred action recipients in there. So at least we're not going backwards on immigration. I mean, we want a comprehensive solution to indicate the path to citizenship. Of course, I support that. But that would take a new law. Deferred action doesn't do that. But at least we don't want to go backwards, and people who are legally able to work today say they can't go to work the next day. I don't know if I can make it over there. I've certainly read reports. We also have to make sure that people don't live there indefinitely. So whether you're, I agree. I mean, I know the conditions are not good, and the answer, of course, is we want to make them better. Yes. However, we also want to make sure that families aren't there for 10 years, for 15 years, for the entire life of a child growing up. We have to find a way to get people resettled. And of course, America needs to do its part for sharing refugees as well as refugees from other parts of the world, as do other countries. But America traditionally, as the global leader, the wealthiest, most powerful country, should be the one raising the bar and challenging other countries, not shying away from our responsibilities to global stability, as we have been under President Trump. So I've consistently supported us accepting more refugees. We have terrific resettlement programs, including here at Fort Collins, usually in conjunction with churches and other organizations. And that also is the way, you mentioned the risk of radicalization. Again, the best answer to that is, again, prevent people from growing up and living their whole lives in refugee camps upset with everybody, and to be integrated into a modern society where they become productive members of American society, of German society, of Canadian society, of British society, wherever we'll find it, as well as, of course, America's role in trying to restore stability in conflict areas. And we certainly know in Syria that's not easy, and there's not a clear path to do it. But when we have these conflict areas, American foreign policy should support multilateral solutions to restore stability and allow people to return home where possible.
And also any ways that you are encouraging others. Because obviously, sport is great, but it takes more than that. So.
It's a good question. So, let's take healthcare as an example. So I support universal coverage, Medicare for all. I sponsor that bill. I think everybody should have healthcare. So I also know that that probably won't pass this Congress. So I have sort of a criteria under which I would support any reform to healthcare. To me, if it expands coverage, if it reduces costs, and it maintains or improves quality, those are the principles under which I would support any reform from the left or the right. So I'm not, some of the Republican replacement bills would kick 21 million people off insurance. To me, compromise is not, oh, we're only going to kick 6 million people off insurance, we support our bill. I say, no, that's still worse than what we have. But what compromise does mean is if we can't get to universal, let's expand coverage. If we can cover 3 billion more people, 5 million more people, I would be happy to support thoughtful bipartisan ways to do that. So compromise is the only way things get done. You're going to see a lot of that horse trading and compromise around this must-pass government spending bill, September 30th, early October. You're going to hear immigration discussed because President Trump wants a wall, and he actually now realizes that another country's not going to pay for it, that you need to pay for his wall. So he's trying to send a bill to you. And as Democrats, and certainly myself, I don't want the wall, but let's see if there's a pathway to citizenship for immigrants. We always had border security money in our comprehensive immigration reform package. Whether it was as much as the need for his wall or not, it probably wasn't. But fencing and walls are completely appropriate in some places. We already have them there, as you know. We also want to make sure that there's better border crossings to reduce border wait times and allow for legitimate cross-border commerce, as well as people moving back and forth. So that's all kind of on the table, and we'll see what it looks like. Maybe we can get some meaningful relief for families that are divided by our broken immigration system in this spending bill. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying I'm optimistic, but it's certainly in the realm of possibility, and something that I'll be pushing for. So these are the top 3 priorities. Certainly one of them will continue to be immigration reform. I mean, again, for the young people affected, including residents of northern Colorado, it's really a crisis. I mean, for them, it's they can't go to work the next day. Will your mom be deported? So that affects so many northern Coloradans. A lot of my legislative work is in education. That's my background in the state. I served 6 years on the State Board of Education. I started schools to serve at-risk youth. And I was a big part of helping to replace No Child Left Behind with the Every Student Succeeds Act last Congress. I helped write a number of provisions of that law, which is better than the last one. Also, an example of compromise. It's not the education law that I would have written from word zero, but the fact that almost everybody in Congress wasn't quite unanimous, but almost every Democrat and Republican agreed it was better than the No Child Left Behind Act shows that compromise can still exist in this divided world that we live in. So education, immigration, and then, preserving our health and our environment. I mean, I think keeping our public lands public existentially is so important for Colorado. And beyond that, doing what we can to prevent the defunding of the EPA, prevent the defunding of climate science, all these things that are really very much under siege now. Well, hello, Susan and your son. Well, look, obviously you're doing it, so here we are. And by the way, you're always welcome to post on our Facebook wall. We do read those. You can tweet us, Rep. Jared Polis, and you can also do it the old-fashioned way, send us a letter or a postcard. And frankly, I would recommend a postcard, because what happens with letters ever since the anthrax scare is they go off-site to a facility and they don't come to us for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, and sometimes they're mangled, and I just don't trust it entirely. So a postcard will come right to us, it's just better. And then of course, phone calls, emails, and as I said, Facebook and Twitter, all great ways. And we're here. I mean, obviously some of you in groups come back to Washington. We're happy to meet with you there. Happy to meet with you here. If you have a group of folks that want to discuss a certain topic, call our office. You can meet with either me or a staff person. So those are some of the many ways. They all, count the same in the sense that, if it's an email or a phone call or a postcard, it's not like an office says, oh, we count this one more than that one. For my office, I would say emails are certainly the most convenient, just because we can forward them with ease from one staff member to another, to me, to look at, to read. It's just easier than a postcard, although if you want to write a postcard, write us a postcard. So, again, those are the different ways you can reach us, and thanks for being an active participant in our democracy. So you're absolutely right. On the border security side, border security experts will tell you, and they tell me, and they tell everybody, that the wall is not the way to go. It's not effective, it's not cost effective, it wouldn't work. It's not that we don't need better border security. There's real proposals to do that. It generally involves having aerial surveillance and drones and technology in place appropriate to the different areas of our southern frontier, the mountainous areas, the rivers, the deserts. A wall would be a costly boondoggle that, again, contrary to the promise President Trump made during the campaign, he would not be able to charge another country for. He would force you to pay for, or would leave our nation deeper in debt. The costs are estimated in tens of billions of dollars, $40 billion, something like that. And at the end of the day, it wouldn't be very effective, even in preventing illegal immigration, which I guess is what they say they wanted for. About half of the people who are here illegally today didn't come across that border. They came here legally through some kind of visa, and then they stayed and worked illegally, or they came in some other manner. And more would simply come in other manners, and it would not be effective at all in actually stopping that flow. As I said, it's about only half of the people here today illegally that even came across that border. So it would be a very costly boondoggle, and I think you hit on a word there that is perhaps symbolic. I think you're right. I don't know. There's no border security expert I know who says that this would actually help, but it's symbolic of a country with walls. I think bad symbolism. Perhaps Mr. Trump thinks good symbolism. I fundamentally think that we should be a welcoming country. We should be a country that is, I think Republicans have changed quite a lot over the years. There was President Reagan, remember, who used to talk about the shining something on the hill, the shining city on the hill, right? Something like that example. That was a very evocative image and very positive. I think that this walled-off America with a lot of spikes and defense money and leaves a hollowed-out core. In fact, this recent proposed increases in defense spending, enormous increases beyond what the military asked for, which leaves us deeper in debt and requires even deeper cuts to education and all the programs that are interior, really risk leaving this kind of hollowed out, well-defended nation with walls and spikes, but without investing in our own sustainability and growth. What was the second one? I don't remember. Oh, yeah, well, so obviously, again, the president has the power part, and how the president uses that power, I think shows a lot about their character, the symbolism, of what they did, and the fact that he chose, I think for his very first pardon, at least the very first one we all heard about, I didn't hear of any others, to pardon somebody who had been in violation of civil rights laws, shows his priorities. It shouldn't shock any of us, given the comments he made after Charlottesville, given the rhetoric against immigrants, given so much else that he has done. But now he has joined that symbolism by an actual action to prevent somebody who is guilty under the due process of law and denying people their civil rights from having to pay the price for violating our laws. Setting a terrible example for thousands of other sheriffs and law enforcement professionals across the country that somehow the president perhaps doesn't even believe in protecting our civil rights.